Everyone! So today I am bringing you my December reviews. I actually read quite a bit in December, despite what my Goodreads says. Some of them I didn't include because they were plays, so I didn't include the entire collection because I hadn't finished it. I'd only read one play out of the selection. And other ones were rereads, so yeah, but I did read quite a bit. So to start with, the first book I read in December was Philip Pullman's Northern Lights from his Dark Materials collection. I only read the first book. Jen and Holly were hosting a read-along of the entire trilogy, but I didn't really feel up to reading an entire trilogy, and I generally like to leave a bit of space in between books when I'm reading them by the same author to prevent like back-to-back comparisons. So I only read Northern Lights, which I enjoyed. This was a reread for me. I read it back when the movie first came out, which I think I mentioned in my TBR. But yeah, it was good. It was better than what I remembered it. I think I got a lot more out of it this time because there was a discussion going on about it, but it's still not one of my favorite childhood series. I'm sorry, Jen, I know, and Holly, I know this is one of your favorite series, but I think because I came at this as an adult rather than as a child, like I never really experienced it reading it at a younger age, unlike some series like Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings, which I read growing up. I kind of have those memories attached to them, same with the Chronicles of Narnia, whereas this I've only experienced as an adult, so I can't really get into it the same way that I did other childhood series. But I did really enjoy this, so I am going to eventually reread the other two because it's been ages and I don't really remember the plot very well. Next up was another buddy read, and this was hosted over on Jean's channel. She did a classical read-along, and we read Euripides, The Bacchae, which I have in this beautiful Chicago University Press edition. I absolutely love these editions. They're fantastic translations, so if you're looking to get into some more classical playwrights, I would recommend these. They're also a little bit, I think at least, a little bit more stylistically prettier than the Black Penguin Spine classics or the Oxford Will classics, which are also perfectly acceptable editions. They also do fantastic translations. I was familiar with this story. I was actually supposed to study this for a course last year, and then because my university went on strike, we ended up not studying it. So I was really glad to get a chance to read it and discuss it. The Bacchae is an interesting story. It basically deals with the cult of Dionysus, and I'm quite familiar with mystery cults. I actually did quite a bit of research for mystery cults, both Roman and Greek, when I was doing my undergrad. So I quite enjoyed that aspect of it. And I have actually studied the Bacchanalia, which is the rites of like Dionysus's mystery cult, because there was at one point in Rome, I want to say 145, it was actually exiled for Rome, and we had a big discussion in class about it. This basically tells the story of Dionysus, who basically is refused his status as a god by some mortals, and so he gets really angry and he just decides to destroy everything that they love and hold dear, as the Greek gods tend to do because they're a little bit petty. I wouldn't recommend this if this is your first introduction to Euripides. He's actually the Greek playwright that I am most familiar with. I read the most of his works, but I do really enjoy his works. The Bacchae is something that I would say maybe wait a little bit. Included in this collection is Iphigenia in Alice, which is probably I think it was my first Euripides and probably my favorite, so I'd recommend maybe starting there. Next up is the other classical Greek play that we read, and this is actually a comedy, and it was my first introduction to this author, which is Aristophanes' Frogs. The reason Jean picked these is because Euripides actually features as a character, so there's a little bit of intertextuality there. I will say I prefer my tragedies to my comedies. I don't mind Aristophanes, and I'm really looking forward to expanding on my knowledge of the Greek playwright, but I do prefer Plautus as a comedy, like a classical comedy playwright. Yeah, I prefer Plautus. I think his Brothers Menechmus is absolutely hilarious, especially when you compare it with Shakespeare's A Comedy of Errors. Those two, basically Shakespeare lifted the entire plot of the Brothers Menechmus. But yes, The Frogs basically deals with Euripides wants to be declared the best playwright in all the world, so he goes down into the underworld and fights Sophocles and Aeschylus for that title, and it's very funny. It's very crude though, And yes, so if you like fart jokes or you like jokes about, you know, basically if you like toilet humor, I would recommend this book, this play. It's very funny, but not necessarily my taste of humor. So then next up, I read a book that's been on my shelf for a while, and I was pushed to do this by Ange over at Beyond the Pages, and I've talked about Ange on this channel before, and it is Angel by Elizabeth Taylor. Now, I bought this, I'll be entirely honest, I bought this because the cover's really pretty. It's one of those VMC designer editions, and it was really cheap at the used bookstore, and these are quite expensive online. They generally are around $20, which I find quite pricey for a book. I mean, it's a hardback, so it's actually not that expensive, but I found it for about $10 at a used bookstore, so I snapped it up, even though I didn't know anything about Elizabeth Taylor, I didn't know anything about this book, but it was so cheap, how could I resist? And I actually really enjoyed this. This was a fantastic read. It has one of my favorite things to be contained in a book, and that is an unlikable narrator. Oh, you guys know how much I like unlikable characters. Basically, Angel is a young girl growing up. She is very much middle class, and she decides to pursue a career of writing, and she writes these really flowery, over-the-top romances that sell really, really well, and it basically details her life, and it's really tragic and very sad, but it's also absolutely wonderful. So if you haven't experienced Elizabeth Taylor, I would definitely recommend reading her as an author. I have one more of her books on my shelves, and I'm really looking forward to digging into it. So I definitely highly recommend this one. It's one of the more modern classics that I read. Next up is a classic, and that is Maria Edgeworth's Belinda. I decided to get this one off my TBR. I picked this up because Ron over at Ron Lit recommended it if you like Jane Austen. She also recommended one of my favorite books of last year, which is Frances Burney's Evelina. And I had read 2 of the books that she had mentioned, and this was one of the ones that I hadn't. So I picked this up and decided to read it. Basically, this deals with Belinda, the title character, and her coming up in the world. Her aunt is known throughout, you know, the upper class of British society as a matchmaker in marrying off all of her sisters, and this kind of works against Belinda in that she doesn't actually subscribe to her aunt's beliefs in marriage, and she's actually just a really genuinely great person. And it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite characters of all time is in this, Lady Delacour. I think she is absolutely wonderful. If you like Jane Austen and you like young women coming of age, kind of marriage plot kind of stories, I would definitely recommend this. This is also, interestingly, one of the only classics that I've come across in which a mixed race marriage is actually, well, first of all, a mixed race marriage actually happens, and a mixed race marriage in the upper classes is actually proposed and considered as a serious marriage candidate. I would recommend getting the Oxford edition. In later editions, my understanding is that Maria Edgeworth was actually forced to edit the work and take that out. But yes, I would recommend this edition, so you get the original text with all that excellent drama going on. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Next up is one that I did as a buddy read with Ange, and it is one that has been on my shelf for a while, and it is The Mayor of Castlebridge by Thomas Hardy. I actually got this edition for my birthday this year, and my sister picked it up for me from my wish list, so thank you Jen, once again, and I absolutely love this. This is probably one of my favorite Hardys. Basically the premise of this plot, and this happens in the first chapter, so it's of no surprise, is the main character, who eventually becomes the mayor of Castlebridge, gets really drunk at a fair and sells his wife and child to a sailor. So it's a little bit absurd, but it's absolutely fantastic, and it basically just details their lives from that point forward. Like most of Hardy's works, it's pretty tragic, but it's also like ends on a happy note, like Far From the Madding Crowd, which is really lovely. Tessa the Dubervilles definitely ends on a fully tragic note. This one does have a little bit of, you know, hope at the end. There is that sparkle of hope at the end that Hardy does so well. So if you like Thomas Hardy, I would definitely recommend this one. And then the last up that I read in the month is one that I actually was trying to read in October, but I couldn't really get into it, and I set it aside, and then there was like a couple days left in the month, but I'm like, why don't I just read this? And that is Susan Hill's The Woman in Black. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of this work in the Dan Radcliffe's adaptation. I haven't watched that adaptation. I don't really watch horror. This is a Gothic novel. It feels very Victorian Gothic, but it was written in the 1980s, which is kind of a bit confusing. But basically, the main character is a solicitor, and he has to go to Eel Marsh House and basically deal with the death of the woman who owned this house, and he starts seeing this apparition of this woman in black, and it's a ghost story. It's a good old-fashioned ghost story. I enjoyed this. I can't say that it's amazing. It's not like, oh, this was the best ghost story of all ghost stories, but it's entertaining. So I would recommend it if you feel like reading something a little bit spooky. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about it. There's not too much to say about it, but those are the books that I read in December. Leave me in the comments down below what you guys have read, and I will see you guys later on in the week with another video. Bye!